So as I mentioned, I'm a composer and sound designer in the game industry. I've been doing this for a long time. I started composing when I was 8. I started freelancing at 19, and I won't tell you how old I was, but in 2007, I started doing this full time. I've worked on about 100 games under the moniker Walz Music and Sound. I'm a contractor at Kabam. I've worked with John Romero on Ravenwood Fair, worked with a lot of other companies doing a lot of cool games, and I do every aspect of audio. Please tweet me at Walz Music, and also check out the Game Audio Alliance, which I mentioned before, if you want to learn more about opportunities for networking and education, gameaudioalliance.com. Twitter handle, Game Audio Allies, because there are not enough characters to do Game Audio Alliance on Twitter. So, theory is useful and worth your time. I get a lot of pushback from those who don't know much about theory. If you already know a lot about theory, this might be just a refresher course. Raise your hand if you know a lot about music theory. Raise your hand if you don't know much at all about music theory. Good. Good. There's a few of you. Good. So hopefully, even if you do know, you're going to be reminded about some things and you can use them for your game audio. So it helps to make your music more moving emotionally. It develops it a little, it refines it, it makes it more interesting, okay? It's great to be able to just play something on the piano and say that's done, but it's another thing to be able to go through that and analyze all the chords you've used and switch things up. It's going to get you more recognition and awards for your soundtracks. So if you're a developer, are there any developers out there at all? Okay, a few. So if you work with an audio person who is using some theory, it might help make their music more interesting. It can win you some awards. You can make a soundtrack that's going to stand alone as art. That's going to get you fan engagement, recognizable brand, make you some more money in sales. Theory is going to provide tools that make it easier for you to be unique and creative. So many times I've sat there and I don't know what to do next in my piece. I'm at a dead end. Pull out my theory book, remind me of some chords, some things that I can do, some tricks, some melodic tools. All of a sudden I have another minute of material, just like that. So this is Rachel Ray's 30-minute meal music theory course. I'm going to try to get through everything. I tried to do this in Amsterdam, and it was really hard because I ran out of time. So I'm not going to do that this time. So I've cut some slides. If you want to know more, you can go back to Amsterdam and look at that. But hopefully I'm going to get through this one. So first off, let's talk about solfeggio. Do you know what solfeggio is, anyone? Oh, good. Not everyone knows what this is. So solfege, or solfeggio, is basically a tool to figure out the scale steps of any particular scale. And if you know the sound of music, you know what solfeggio is, because they go do, a deer, a female deer, re, a drop of golden sun. So solfeggio is do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. And yes, there are hand cymbals. Why hand cymbals? Well, if you sing in a chorus like I do, you'll see that the director will often try to do warm-ups and such with these Kerwinian hand cymbals. And he may have the tenors on do over here and the basses on so over here, or re, or whatever, and move them around. And just by seeing the hand, after you learn this, you know exactly how to tune and where to go in this scale. So I don't have perfect pitch, which means I can't just go A, which is probably pretty close to A. You can test me. I'm not sure. But I can't do that with every key. However, if you tell me that the key is do, I will know so, and I'll know mi, and I'll know fa, la, re, do. Any pitch I can find very easily. That's the power of solfege. So why do you care, being a game composer, about solfege or any type of composer? For me, it's really helpful to compose melodies using solfege. If you play the piano, you can play your piano and compose some things. If you play guitar, you can play guitar and compose some things. It's another tool to sing a melody and to do so with structure. And for me, since I know solfege really well, I can actually just write the solfege down of a melody. I don't need to waste time writing on a staff and all of that, you know. And so it saves you a lot of time, and it's a lot easier to remember. So there are a few types of solfege scales. The very typical one is the one I already sang for you. It's called the diatonic scale. It's every normal scale step in a scale. Pentatonic is what a lot of folk music uses around the world even. And this is like those tunes like do, re, mi, so, la, so, mi, do, re, do, re, mi, so, la, so, mi, do, re, do, that sort of thing. So all folk music mostly uses do, re, mi, so, mi, re, do, la, so, do. So those are the most used and common things. They're also all the black keys on the piano, which is why you see a lot of kids wanting to play all the black keys, and it's just kind of beautiful. It doesn't have all of the other tones that are going to clash with everything else. Now, there is a chromatic scale as well, and there are hand symbols for them as well. It gets a little esoteric, but so instead of just all the way up the scale, diatonically you have do, di, re, mi, fa, fi, so, si, la, li, ti, do, and down. Do, ti, te, la, le, so, se, fa, mi, me, ra, re, ra, do. And if you're really good at tuning that, you're going to end up in an octave. And if you're not, it's going to be a little flat or sharp. So in any case, kind of crazy. As you get really good with solfege, you're going to be able to hear any of these other tones, these accidentals, as we call them, these raised and lower tones that are not normally occurring in a normal scale. You're going to be able to hear them at any time and just pull them out of a hat. And if you can do this, you're going to be able to compose a lot easier. This system is not particularly useful for modern music because it's often atonal or it doesn't use a normal scale, and it just gets very weird when you start double sharping and double flatting things. But for most music, especially game music, this is going to be a very useful system. So next, let's talk a little bit about keys, relative chords, and modulation. So, relative keys. What are relative keys? Relative keys are all the keys that can happen in any given key. So in C major, for example, C major is called the tonic or home bass, and it's do. Okay? Easy. G major is the fifth of the chord, meaning C, D, E, F, G. It's the fifth one. Okay? That one is called the dominant, and it's called the dominant because it leads very strongly back to home. Typical example is like the famous Mozart, dun, 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 dun. So that leading of dun, dun, so da, 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 dum, right? Happens all the time in classical music. Happens all the time in many types of music. So that's called the dominant. Very common to transpose there. F major is called the subdominant. It's very common to play this before the dominant or before the tonic. That's the fourth of the scale, fa. Do, re, mi, fa. So you have fa, la, do, la, fa. That's F major, right? D minor is very, very common as a secondary dominant because it's the dominant of the dominant. Follow me for a sec. So you have so, do, right? That fourth relationship. Dun, dum, bum, bum. So if you take the G major one, which is the dominant, and you take a fourth down from that and go to that in that same relationship, it's the dominant of that, okay? So you often get this kind of sequence or circle of these three chords happening all the time in so many types of music. So this is meant to demystify. I know it's very complicated at the moment, but if you've never heard this before, it demystifies things you've heard a million times before. And if you start analyzing music, you'll see this kind of C major, G major, D minor, back to G major, back to C, this kind of relationship, very common. One of the most important ones, I think, is A minor in the key of C, which is the sixth, because it's the relative minor. We say relative because it has all the same notes on the keyboard as the original key. So if you take any key out there, I don't care which it is, and you go to the sixth step, okay, you end up in the relative minor of that major key. And it's very common especially in minor music, sadder music, more serious music, to kind of vacillate between this major feeling and this minor feeling. Very, very commonly used. So let's talk about what modulating means. So modulating is when you go from like one key to a different key. So what you need to do to modulate in a way that sounds natural is you need to recreate all of those steps on the scale of another key temporarily until that other key feels like your new home. Okay? So let me give you an example. Let's transpose to the dominant or the fifth. Well, what does, in C major, G is the dominant, we said. What does G major have that C major doesn't? Anyone? An F sharp, right. So we need to create an F sharp in there temporarily until F sharp feels like, oh, there's always been an F sharp here. Like, I never noticed it, but here it is. So, for example, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, so, fi, so. Change so to do because now G is your home. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, fa, mi, re, do, ti, do. And you can just do that endlessly and just loop through all of these dominants that way. And it feels very natural to do that. So next time you're trying to figure out how to get to a certain key, this is a good way to get to the fifth. The fourth, there's a very simple way to do that as well. So in C, right, the subdominant is F. What does F have that C does not? A B flat, right. So C, we can make a B flat out of that. Let's see, it normally has a B natural. So do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, te, la, so, fa. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, fa, mi, re, do. Just like that. Because you've kind of made this relation of so, fa, mi, re, do, this very strong statement, even though in the original key that wasn't the solfege. So that's the power of solfege. It really helps you like navigate and understand what's happening. Unless you learned real old school and you already know this theory, it's a good way of learning it. So another thing is to study your songwriting top hits chord progressions. You can Google them. You can find books. At the end of my presentation, I have some books that have some great just lists of chords, of things that are very successful. And this, if you understand this, you're going to understand why those work so well. Okay? Next, rhythms. Practice all your rhythms and use all your rhythms. A lot of times I hear stagnant compositions that are just kind of like plunk, diddy, plunk, 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 plunk-a-dee, plunk, 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 right? Kind of boring. You want to be interesting and different. These are just a few examples. There's obviously a lot more than these 16th note patterns. So, you know, you have a measure of rest, you have a bum, you have a dum, you have a da, and you have a da, and you have da-da. And da da 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 da. So you have a lot of different possibilities here. The one that's not here, that's also interesting, is a da 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 da, which is used a lot in like Hungarian type music or Eastern Europe music. It's not really here. This is kind of Western centric music, but in any event. Look at these patterns and really like look at your music and see if you're using these, because it'll make it a lot more interesting if you add variety. So something I use is called the sing the words trick when I can't think of a melody. This next screen will help you with that a little bit. This is a cute little meme. So it's taking the natural cadences of English words and adding rhythm to them. So Sasquatch, big walrus, lazy sloth, chupacabras, raw hamburger, dinosaur fight, vampire bat, want some cat antlers, puppy dog costume, Denzel Washington, Guatemalan dudes, dog, photobombing, Sharknado movie, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Engelbert Humperdinck. So, gives you some fun little things. Oh, thank you. So, anyway, as silly as this is, it's funny because I saw this after I've been using this technique where I take the description of what a game developer has given me of a certain area, and I use those words to make a melody if I can't think of something. So one of the examples that comes to mind is when they wanted me to write this kind of majestic music for an ice castle. And I thought, I don't really know what to do for this. And they said it's splendid, beautiful, and cold. So I said, okay, splendid, beautiful, and cold is the castle. And that was it. That's all I needed. From that, I developed the whole melody. So as silly as this is, it's quite useful, actually. Cross rhythms. So this is something that is not just melodic, but something that you can use combined with your percussion. I hear a lot of boring percussion tracks in game music. And this is something that you can play with any instruments, whether it be pitched or not, is the idea of certain amount of beats happening at the same time as certain other beats, okay? So, for example, the very common one is 2/3 or 3/2. This is like a triplet happening at the same time as eighth notes, okay? Or you can write it differently in 6/8. So you have this idea of 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 with a 1, 2, 1, 2, like, I like to be in America, I like to be in America. So that's split up, but you can do them at the same time together. And anyone can do this if you just practice. It's like 1, 2, and 3, 1, 2, and 3. And my left hand is doing 2, and my right hand is doing 3. 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. 1, 2. So that can be used melodically. It can be used with percussion, any combination, and it's very just engaging and interesting. So I really stress that you should play with that. There's other types too, like 3/4, and the little mnemonic for that is pass the mashed potatoes. Otherwise, it's very hard to feel that unless you're a drummer. So it's like pass the mashed potatoes, pass the mashed potatoes, pass the mashed potatoes, and you end up with 4 on your right and 3 on your left. Very, very hard to switch back and forth to. I'm not going to try that in my presentation live, but you can work on that at home. Another thing is to use syncopation. So syncopation is when there's a beat that's not on the beat, okay? So a lot of melodies that are interesting start with da 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 instead of like da 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 da. You know, it's going to sound really childish compared to something that's like interesting. So look at your music. If there's no like little rest before every bar, you know, ever, you probably should play with that idea of syncopation because it's a really fun, engaging thing that's like built into our ears and our body to hear as exciting. Let's talk about meter just a little bit. So meter is the collection of beats and how many beats we have in every little group, every little bar. 4/4 is a very common one, right? We see this all the time in pop music and that sort of thing. So it's just kind of a 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Waltz is a triple time, so it's like a 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. 6/8 is the one that these next two are called compound because they have ideas of duple and triple at the same time, 2 and 3 at the same time. They have 2 groups of 3 beats, okay? So it's like a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So there's this aspect of 2 in there, but this aspect of 3 at the same time. Gives you a lot more opportunity to kind of play with stuff. And it still has that lilting, like waltz feeling, but it's its own little creature. 12/8 is just like 6/8, but there's 4 of them, 4 groups. And it has a lot of majestic military marchy type feeling. So it's like so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That kind of feeling. Weird meters. Let's talk about weird meters. So you can make your own meters. Just add any amount of notes that you want in a bar, and you create your own meter. And it's something I hear all the time in interesting game music. Don't be afraid to experiment. 5/4 is another one that I hear a lot. So just add another beat in there. So I did this battle theme recently in 13/8. See if you can hear the 13. And right at the end there, it goes kind of back into a normal 4 feeling, and then back into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Can't say that quickly, but you get the idea. So 13/8, interesting. So don't be afraid to just add 1 meter change in one bar that's different, and then go back to normal. It really throws off the listener in a good way. It makes it really interesting and memorable. Next, let's talk about some of my favorite things, super sneaky, interesting melody tricks, okay? So these are things to, A, make your melody broader and bigger and get more interesting ideas out of one little simple thing, and B, come up with something from nothing. 2 different ideas. First idea, existing melodies. We already have it, let's make it more interesting. Modal. This is to change the mode, which for those of you who don't know about theory, what that means is you change the scale that you're using. So a typical one a lot of you will know is minor versus major. You have do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, and you have la, ti, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, right? Different scales. So you can take an existing melody and then change the mode. For example, Mary had a little lamb, little lamb, little lamb. Mary had a little lamb, its fleece was white as snow. Let's make it minor. Mary had a little lamb, little lamb, little lamb. Mary had a little lamb, its fleece was white as snow. You can do this with any melody you want. Something that you've already written and you want to reuse somewhere else, just change the mode. As you explore it, you'll find out mode is a lot more than just major or minor. There's many, many types of modes. But for 30 minutes, that's what you get to learn. Inversion is when you play it upside down, okay? So anything that goes down, you're going to play up. So instead of Mary had, it's Mary had a little lamb, like that, all backwards. Retrograde is when you take the whole thing and read it backwards, which I'm not even going to really try to do that right now. But the good thing is your DAW at home will do this for you, okay? There's always an option for these things, and they're actually really interesting, and often I'll do it and then adjust a few notes, because I'm like, it sounds kind of ugly, but like if I change that note, it's going to sound really cool. So it's an ends to a means, you know? Sequencing, that's when you take one little melody idea and you play it again up here and down here and over here. So it's really the same idea, you're just doing it over and over again in different places on the scale. Permutation is very similar to sequence, but you might change kind of the relationships a little bit, but you kind of keep the direction. I'm going to play an example so you'll see. Pedal tone is when you keep the bass note the same, but change everything else. And another thing you can do is change the bass note and keep everything else the same. So there's a lot of these little tricks that you can use. So like this is a kind of diamond commercial slots game that I did. So you get the idea. I'm using the same material and just doing different things with it in this thought right here. Augmentation is when you take a melody and play it really slowly. So instead of Mary had a little lamb, it could be as slow as Mary had a, etc. If you do it slowly enough, it's not going to be recognizable as a melody anymore to the listener. But you've used the same material to grow your piece. So I can take that and make it into like the bass line for like 30 seconds, and you won't even know that it was my melody anymore. But I didn't have to do anything creatively different. I didn't have to come up with new material. I'm using what I already had. Diminution, it's a hard word to say, is the same thing, but it's making it very, very fast. So like, Mary had a little lamb, little lamb, little lamb, Mary had a little lamb, it's by snow, you know. And that can be fun for the little sparkles that I like to put on music, like little harp runs or little glissando, you know, little things that are just kind of happening, and you wouldn't recognize it as the melody, but I'm using the same material again. Side slip is used all the time in pop music. It's when you play the exact same thing up a half step or down a half step. And you can just go back and forth and like grow 5 seconds into 15 seconds really easily. So things you can do to create a new melody. Indeterminacy is when you like do something like random to find your melody, like rolling dice. So I roll a die, and 1 through 6, I assign notes 1 through 6, say. Or I roll 2 dice, and I do 12 different notes. And I just roll it like 10 times, and I write down the results, and they correspond to the scale steps. So if I roll a 1, it's do. If I roll a 2, it's re. If I roll a 3, it's mi, etc. So I can now end up with like totally things, something I would never think of, okay? Serialism is when you take all 12 chromatic steps. So if you rewind to the beginning, when I said do, di, re, all of that, all those 12 steps, you use all of them, and you use them in the exact same order all the time, but you can change the rhythm, but you just develop a pattern of like, I'm going to play these 12 notes always in this order. And it sounds totally random and weird, but you can come up with things you'd never write otherwise. Interval limitation is like, I'm only going to use a perfect fifth or a half step, something like that. Sometimes limitations are a good way to make you come up with something new. Polytonality is when you say, for instance, play in D major on the left hand and A major on the right hand. You're in totally 2 different keys, and it will sound very weird and strange, but often you'll think of something new that you would never think of otherwise. So you can mix and match these ideas, and this is a piece that I did. I'll just play a little bit of. This is for a witch town that's very strange and cuckoo, right? And it has to sound kooky. So I made a 12-tone row. And I used a lot of these different ideas here. Here comes a 12-tone row. Also a lot of augmentation and diminution happening here. And in a minute, we're going to have Retrograde. The whole thing's going to play backwards. So there you go. Thanks. So yeah, I would never write something like that otherwise. But actually, to me, it's fairly tonal, and it's actually kind of interesting. So challenge yourself to do some new things. The last thing I'm going to touch on is orchestration. I could do a whole talk on orchestration. But as far as theory is concerned, it's important to understand certain things that happen in scores that are theory-based that you need to use. Breath markings. Too many times I hear like a flute passage where there's absolutely no rest or break anywhere for like 1 minute. And that's just not going to happen in real life. And so if you're going to use orchestral instruments, you should probably adhere to some of the rules. If you're going to do sci-fi or something else, fine. But if you want it to sound real, you're going to need to add little breath marks where they would naturally occur in a singer or a flute player or any wind instrument. Long phrasing is another thing I rarely hear in game music. Long phrasing is the idea of like, here's short phrase. Mary had a little lamb, little lamb, little lamb. Mary had a little lamb, fleece was white as snow. Okay? Long phrasing takes a whole idea and makes one big thought of it, right? Mary had a little lamb, little lamb, little lamb. Mary had a little lamb, its fleece was white as snow. That was more expressive too. But you get the idea of a long arc. I don't hear this enough in game music. And if you want it to sound really nice, this is a way to really move people. It's going to not be monotonous and not robotic. String bowings and articulations. So I'm sure you've seen, staccato and pizzicato and marcato and these other things. Well, orchestras use all of these, and they use them a lot. So if you're going to use string instruments, you probably want to use them. One thing that I like to do to make these sound more real than using just one library is I'll take like pizzicato samples from 3 different sample libraries, and I'll use all of them all at the same time and mix them so they blend. They're going to be a little maybe out of tune from each other and a little bit chaotic and maybe in a different space. But if you tweak them enough, volume and reverb and everything else, you can make something very realistic sounding doing this. Appropriate voice leading, I could talk for an hour about that. That means if you're writing a piece that's medieval, you're going to have maybe a do to so, 2 notes, going to a re to a la, like this kind of open fifth, moving around in parallel. But you'll never ever do that in romantic or classical music. That's just not allowed. It's not what you do. So knowing the rules of voice leading is important. And again, the books at the end of the talk will help with that. Suspensions and anticipations, same thing. These are things where you hit a chord and there's one note missing from the chord, like you have a 1, 4, and 5, and then it slowly goes down to the 3, like the amen type idea. That's a suspension. Anticipation is when you hit a chord early before you've gotten to that point, and there's this moment of oh. I'm going to play an example that has one of those. Dynamics, this is so important. So dynamics are loud and soft, okay? If you always have everything at I call it 100, 100 dynamic, 100 volume, which is the default for a lot of DAWs. Every time you enter a note, it's at 100. It's just going to all sound like the mezzo forte orchestra. It's all just going to be kind of loud, not really loud, not quiet, not tender, just really monotonous. Really avoid this. Go through, play things if you can, and go through and, even adjust note by note how loud every note is until it sounds moving and real. So just a couple examples where I've used some of these ideas. We have the Dragomancer's World theme first. So it keeps you moving. The Conquest theme has a good example of a anticipation at the end. You actually think it's going to be a suspension, then it's an anticipation at the end. So play around with stuff like that. Find the final chord you want and play it really early, and then see if you can get there somehow and surprise everyone. That's the sort of thing classical music does to make it really interesting. And it's this kind of thing I don't see a lot in game music. So I hope this has really helped you. These books up here I would jot down if you're interested at all. There's some that are specifically game oriented, and then some are theory-based for beginners. I've found all these books very, very helpful. So that is my presentation, Theory 101. I hope you enjoyed it.